Part 2. 29th September 1957. Why write again, when I know I must exercise caution, when I know that to commit my desires to paper is madness, when I know that those screaming bitch types who insist on trolling all over the town spoil it for the rest of us. I saw Gilbert Harding last week in his ghastly rollers screeching out the window at some poor lad on a bicycle. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Why write again? Because today things are different. One might even say that everything's changed. And so here I am, writing this journal, and that means indiscretions. But I can't keep quiet about this. I'm not going to name names. I'm not completely reckless. But I'm going to write this. I've met someone. Why write again? Because Patrick Hazelwood, 34, has not given up. I do think he's perfect, ideal even, and it's more than his body, although that is ideal too. My affairs, such as they've been, and they've been few, tend to be complicated, drawn out, reluctant perhaps. How others like Charlie get along so damned carefree is beyond me. Those boys at the meat rack have their charms, but it's all so. I won't say sordid. I don't mean that. Fleeting. Beautifully, awfully fleeting. We'll burn this after writing. It's one thing to commit oneself to paper, quite another to leave that paper lying about for any eyes to devour. It took place over a middle-aged lady sitting on the pavement, walking along Marine Parade. A bright, warm, late summer morning. The day, Tuesday. The time, approximately 7:30. Early for me, but I was on my way to the museum to catch up on some paperwork. Strolling along, thinking how pleasant it was to enjoy the quiet and the solitude, vowing to get up at an hour earlier every day, I saw a car, a cream Ford. I'm sure it was. Nudge of the wheel of a bicycle, just gently. There was a slight delay before the bicycle wobbled enough to tip its rider. Hands splayed, legs tangled with wheels on the pavement. The car drove on regardless, leaving me to hurry to the woman in distress. By the time I reached her, she was sitting up on the edge of the curb, so I knew there was no serious damage. She looked at me in her 40s, and her basket and handlebars were loaded with bags of all types. String, paper, some kind of canvas construction, so it wasn't surprising that she'd lost her balance. I touched her shoulder and asked if she was all right. "What does it look like?" she barked. I took a step back. Her voice had venom in it. "You're shocked, of course. Livid is what I am. That bastard knocked me off." She was a sorry sight, her spectacles lopsided, her hat askew. "Do you think you can stand?" Her mouth twisted. "We need the police here. We need the police, now." Seeing I had no alternative but to go along with her wishes, I dashed to the nearest police box in the corner of Bloomsbury Place, thinking I could call from there, leave her with some obliging bobby and go on with the rest of my day. I've never had much patience with our boys in blue, have always despised their brutish little ways, their stocky bodies squeezed in thick wool, those hideous helmets rammed onto their heads like black jam jars. What was it that officer had said about the incident in Napoleon, where the boy was left with half his face carved away from the bone? "Damned pansies, lucky that's all they got. That's all they cut off." I think those were his exact words. So I wasn't relishing the thought of coming face to face with a policeman. I steeled myself for the evaluating gaze up and down, the raised eyebrow in response to my voice, the clenched fists in response to my smile, the chilled relations in response to the cut of my jib. But the young man who stepped from the box as I approached was quite different. I could see it straight away. He was properly tall, for a start, with shoulders that looked like they could take the weight of the world and yet were exquisitely shaped. Not a hint of bulk. I thought immediately of the wonderful Greek boy with the broken arm in the British Museum. The way he glows with beauty and strength, the way the warmth of the Mediterranean exudes from him, and still he managed to blend perfectly with his British surroundings. This boy was like that. He wore his awful uniform lightly, and I could see at once that there was life pulsing beneath the rough, black wool of his jacket. We looked at each other for a beat, him with a serious mouth, me with all my words vanished. "Good morning," he said as I tried to remember what it was I wanted. Why was it that I sought out a policeman in the first place? Eventually I stammered, "I need your help, officer." My actual words, and God knows I meant them. My plea for help, my cry for protection. It reminds me now of when I became friends with Charlie at school. I went to him in desperation, thinking he could help me stop the bullying. And he did teach me not to care so much. Charlie always had something so nonchalant in his manners. Something that made them back off. Something so fuck you, is how he'd put it. And I've always loved that. Loved it and wished I could have it to myself. "There's been an accident," I continued. "A lady's come off her bicycle. I'm sure it's nothing serious, but show me the way." Despite his youth, he managed to sound very capable, and he walked with great energy and determination. Frowning slightly now, asking with all the necessary questions. Was I the only witness? What did I see? What make of the car was it? Did I get a glimpse of the driver? I answered as best as I could, wanting to give him all the information he needed as I followed his great strides. When we reached the woman, she was still sitting on the pavement, but I noticed she'd gained enough strength to gather her bags around her. As soon as she saw my policeman, her demeanor changed completely. Suddenly she was all smiles. Looking up at him, eyes ablaze, lips newly licked, she declared herself quite all right, thank you very much. "Oh no, officer, there's been a misunderstanding," she said without glancing in my direction. "The car did come close, but it didn't hit me. I just slipped on the pedals. It's these shoes." She displayed her scuffed black cords as though they were Hollywood dancing heels. And I was a little stunned. You know how it is, officer, early in the morning. On and on she went, chattering away like an excited sparrow. My policeman nodded, his face impassive as she gabbled her nonsense. When she'd run out of steam, he asked, "So you weren't knocked off?" "Not a bit of it." "And you're all right?" "Right as rain." She held out a hand for him to help her up. He obliged, face still expressionless. "It's lovely to meet you, officer," she said, mounting her bicycle, now beaming for England. My policeman granted her a smile. Mind how you go," he said, and we both stood and watched as she cycled away. He turned to me, and before I could begin my explanation, he said, "Batty old bird, wasn't she?" and gave me a small grin, the like of which I'm sure young police constables are meant to have knocked out of them during their probationary period. He had a total confidence in what I'd told him. He believed me, not her, and already trusted me enough to insult a lady in my presence. I laughed. Not exactly a major incident. There you are, sir. I held out my hand. "Patrick Hazelwood." A hesitation. He considered my outstretched fingers. Briefly, I wondered if there was some police regulation forbidding all physical contact, except the forceful kind, with the general public. He then took my hand and told me his name. "I have to say, I thought you handled that very well," I ventured. To my great surprise, his cheeks went a little pink. Hugely touching. "Thank you, Mr. Hazelwood." I winced, but knew better than asking for first names at this early stage. "I suppose you get a lot of that sort of thing, difficult people?" Some." A moment's pause, then he added, "Not so many. I'm new, only been out a few weeks." Again, I was touched by his immediate, unquestioning trust. He's not like the rest. Didn't once give me the evaluating stare, allowed no shadow to pass over his face at the sound of my voice, didn't close down. He was open. He remained open. He thanked me for my help and turned to go. That was 2 weeks ago. One day after the so-called accident, I walked past the police box again. No sign of him. Still, I floated. All the girls in the museum commented on it. "You're chirpy today, Mr. H." And I was, whistling Bizette wherever I went. I knew. That's what it was. I just knew. It was only a matter of time. A matter of playing it right. Of not rushing things. Of not scaring him off. I knew we could be friends. I knew I could give him something he wanted. It's the long game with me. I'm well aware that there are quicker, safer pleasures to be found down the Argyle, or, heaven forbid, the Swatted Dog. And it's not like I dislike those places. It's the competitiveness that gets me down. All the moneyed minorities eyeing one another, positioning themselves for the evening, staking their claim on whatever comes through the door. Oh, it can be fun. I remember particularly a sailor fresh from Pompeii, with the lazy eye and massive thighs. But what I want, well, it's very simple. I want more. So, day 2. Caught a glimpse of him on Burlington Street, but he was so far away that the only way to reach him would have been to run, and I wasn't going to do that. Still, I whistled, perhaps a little quieter, floated, perhaps a little lower. Day 3. There he was, setting off from the box. I did hurry a little in effort to catch up with him, but there was no running. I walked behind him a distance of about 100 yards for a while, watching his trim waist, the paleness of his wrists, winking at me as he strode down the street. To call out for him would have been crass, unwelcome. But I really couldn't walk any faster. He is a policeman after all. I don't suppose he'd take kindly to being shouted by any man. And so I let him go. A whole weekend of waiting lay ahead. I'd forgotten, of course, that policemen do not keep the hours of mere mortals, and was not at all prepared when, on my way to buy a newspaper, I bumped into him on St. George's Road. The day, Saturday. The time, 11:30ish. Another warm, early September day full of glowing light. He was walking towards me on the edge of the pavement. As soon as I saw the uniform, my blood rose. I'd been doing that all week, warming at the sight of police uniforms. A very dangerous way to carry on. My thought was, I'll glance his way, and if he doesn't glance back, that will be the end of it. I'll leave it up to him. He can return the look, or he can walk on. Through many years of experience, I found this is the safest way to conduct oneself. Don't invite trouble, and it won't come looking for you. And fishing for a policeman's gaze is extremely risky business. So I glanced, and he was looking straight at me. Morning, Mr. Hazelwood, he said. I was beaming, no doubt, as we stood and exchanged a few pleasantries about the clemency of the weather. His voice is light, not high-pitched, but not a serious police voice. It's low and delicate, like a very good pipe smoke. Quiet morning so far? I asked. He nodded. No more trouble from our bicycle lady. He gave a small smile, shook his head. This must be when job's at its best, I suppose, I said, trying to prolong our chat, just strolling along, everything in order. He looked me in the eye, his face suddenly serious. Oh no, I need a case. No one takes you seriously until you've had a case. He's trying to be a rather grave young man, I think. He has an eagerness to impress, a longing to say the right thing. It's quite at odds with the grin of his, with the life I can sense pulsing beneath his uniform. There's a pause before he asked, What's your line of work? He has a lovely Brighton accent, very non-you, which he doesn't in the least modify for my benefit. I work in the museum, the art gallery there, and I paint a little. A light sprang up from behind his eyes. You're an artist, of sorts, but that's not nearly as exciting as your work, keeping the peace, making the streets safe, assailing criminals. There was another pause before he laughed. You're joking. No, I'm quite serious. I looked him in the face, and he averted his eyes, mumbled something about having to get on, and we parted. A cloud descended. All day I worried that I'd overstepped with the mark, said too much, been too flattering, too eager. On Sunday it rained, and I spent many hours looking out of my window at the flat grayness of the sea, moping at having lost my policeman. I can be a proper sulker, have been that way since school. Monday, day 6. Nothing. Walking through Kemp Town, I kept my head down and did not allow myself to become distracted by any kind of uniform. Tuesday, the 7th day. I was walking along St. George's Road when I heard footsteps, quick and deliberate, behind me. Instinctively, I made to cross the road, but stopped when I heard a voice. Morning, Mr. Hazelwood. The pipe smoke tones unmistakable. I was so surprised that I swiveled right round and said, Please, call me Patrick. There was that grin again, the one that policemen shouldn't have. A light color in his cheeks, his quality of eager attentiveness. It was the grin that made me plow on. I'd been hoping to bump into you. I fell into step beside him. I'm doing a project. Images of ordinary people, grocers, postmen, farmers, shop girls, policemen, that sort of thing. He said nothing. Our steps were quite roughly in time now, although I was having to walk quickly to keep up with his long strides. And you'd be a perfect subject. I knew this was all too fast, but once I've started talking, I could never seem to stop myself. I'm making some studies from life of suitable subjects such as yourself and comparing them to the past portraits. Ordinary Brighton people, that's what the museum needs. What we need, don't you think? Real people, instead of all these stuffed shirts. I could tell by his cocked head that he was listening very carefully. It's something I hope will be in the museum, on display. It's part of my plan to bring more people in. More ordinary people, that is. I think that if they see people, well, like themselves, they'll be more likely to want to step inside. He stopped and looked me in the face. What would I have to do? I exhaled. Nothing at all. You sit, I draw, at the museum if you like, a few hours of your time. I tried to keep my face quite blank, quite straight. I even managed a nonchalant wave of my hand. Up to you, of course, I just thought, since I'd bumped into you. Then he took off his helmet, and I saw his hair for the first time. His hair, in the exquisite shape of his head. This nearly knocked me off balance. His hair has waves and curls, cut short, but with plenty of life in it. I noticed a little dent running around his scalp where the ugly hat had been. He rubbed the back of his head, as if trying to erase the line, and then replaced the helmet. Well, he said, I've never been asked to model before. I was afraid then, afraid that he'd see right through me, and close himself off completely. But instead he gave a quick laugh and said, will my picture be in the museum? Well, perhaps, yes. I'll do it. Yes, why not? We shook hands, his large and cool, arranged a date, and parted. As I walked away, I started to whistle, and had to stop myself. And then I almost looked back over my shoulder. Pathetic creature. And I had to stop myself from doing that, too. I heard nothing save my policeman's yes for the rest of the day. 30th September 1957. Very late and no sleep. Shadowy thoughts, bad thoughts, chasing me. Have thought about burning my last entry many times. Cannot. What else can make him real except for my words on paper? When no one else can know, how can I convince myself of his actual presence, of my actual feelings? It's a bad habit, writing these things down. Sometimes I think a poor substitute for real life. Every year I have a clear out, burn the lot. Even Michael's letters I burnt. And now I wish I hadn't. Since meeting my policeman, I'm more determined than ever that nothing can take me away from the dark room. 5 years since Michael was lost. And I will not allow myself the luxury of dwelling there. My policeman is nothing like Michael, which is one of the many things I love about him. The words that come to my mind when I think of my policeman are light and delight. I won't go back to the dark room. Work has helped. Steady, regular work. Painting is all very well if you can take the rejection, the weeks of waiting for the right idea to come along, the yards of awful shit you have to turn out before you reach anything decent. No. What's needed are regular hours, small tasks, small rewards. Which is why, of course, my policeman is very dangerous, despite the light and delight. We used to dance, Michael and I, every Wednesday night. I'd make everything right. Fire laid, dinner made. He loved anything with cream and butter. All of those French sauces, sole au vin blanc, poulet au gratin à la crème hollandaise, and, to finish, if I'd had time, Saint-Emilion au chocolat. A bottle of claret, the sheets fresh and clean, a towel laid out, a newly pressed suit, and music. All the sentimental magic that he loved. Caruso to start. I've always hated him, but for Michael I endured it. Then Sarah Vaughan singing The Nearness of You. We'd cling to each other for hours, shuffle around the rug like a couple of marrieds, his cheek burning against mine. Wednesdays were an indulgence. I know that, for him and for me. I made him his favorite butter-rich foods, which played havoc on my stomach, hummed along to Danny Boy, and returned, he danced in my arms. Only when the records were all played, the candles burned down to pools of wax, would I slowly undress him, here in my sitting room, and we danced together naked, in absolute silence, save for our quickening breaths. But that was long ago. He's so young. I know I'm not old, and God knows my policeman makes me feel like a boy again. Like a 19-year-old peeking out of the railings in front of my parents' London house at the butcher's boy who delivered next door. It was his knees, thick but exquisitely shaped, scabbed, thrillingly raw. Once he gave me a baccy on his bike, all the way to the shops. I trembled as I held onto the seat, watching his arse bounce up and down as he pedaled. I trembled but felt stronger, more powerful than I had in my whole life. Listen to me, butcher's boys. I tell myself that my age is an advantage in this case. I'm experienced, professional. What I must never be is avuncular. An old queen with a young tough hanging on his every pound note. Is that what's happening to me? Is that what I'm becoming? Must sleep now.